Welcome. Great to have you here. This is a unique moment, a moment that unites all of us. We all face anxiety and loss. We all see broken systems. We all experience the impact of the climate crisis. Welcome. This is a unique Great to have you here. This is a turning point. Is a unique moment. If we choose to make it a moment that unites all of us. This is a moment to reflect, to learn, to share, and to co-create. And I invite you to contribute. I ask you to contribute. I ask you to partner to fix broken systems. I ask you to join the movement so everyone can step into their change-making power. I ask you to nominate the next generation of changemakers. And I ask you to share your wisdom, your knowledge, your expertise. And I ask you to donate to support changemakers. This is our moment to fix the world. This is our moment to contribute. Today is the day, and you are the one.
Hello everyone. Welcome back. How is it going? Our second day of the Changemaker Summit. Hi, I want to introduce myself. My name is Guzman Fernandez. I'm 20 years old and I'm very lucky to be part of the Asoka Youth Council here in Spain. And also I'm studying at college and trying to generate a community of young people who wants to change things and work with adults. When Asoka offered me to moderate this panel, I agreed without hesitating because today we are gonna talk about education and especially its role in the future. To sharing all their ideas and give us their points of view, today we are so lucky to have with us Noah So, Senior Project Officer on the Future of Learning Innovation team at Unesco. Hi Noah, welcome. Elisabetta Mugine, Director of Research at Indire. Hi Elisabetta, welcome. And Diana Wells, President Emerita at Asoka. Hi Diana, welcome. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. We are going to stay speaking for 1 hour and we are going to ask some questions to all the people who are attending to this panel. You can send us your question by the chat. Luca, our coordinator, will send to me and we can ask it. Well, before I start, I want to share my point of view about this topic. We all know that the future is going to be hard and more now than ever. But from my point of view, it is necessary to stop and think about what the path of education should be about. I've suffered at school where the goal was to study and pass exams, where the important thing was the grades. However, other skills or values were not present. I went out into the adult world without knowing how to understand different people, how to work with the person who is in front of you. So I want to ask to the audience and to the three persons we have here, what education should be about? What should be the school's role? And families and governments, what kinds of tools help us shaping society through education? And how can we create meaningful learning experience which lead to the development of the most relevant skills for thriving in this complex world? Please, audience, share with us your ideas about these questions. And hi, Noah, Elisabetta, and Diana. I want just start to asking Noah, how are you approaching the future of education at Unesco right now?
Sure, thanks very much, Guzman. And it's great to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So right now at UNESCO, I have the privilege of helping to lead a new initiative on the futures of education. So this is a visioning exercise that follows in the tradition of two previous global reports. The Four Commission's 1972 report, Learning to Be, and some of you might be more familiar with the Delors Commission's 1996, Learning the Treasure Within report. For our current project, which is chaired by the President of Ethiopia, Her Excellency, Madam Sahle-Work Zewde, and I can talk more about the details later if relevant, we're using the tagline, Learning to Become. And that's the title of this session. So I thought maybe I would just make brief opening remarks about that idea. I think it's that idea really gets at what everyone at this summit is talking about. What are we going to become? And of course, that's not a passively let's sit back and observe what happens thing. It's a question of what do we want to become and how do we accomplish that? So let me say three things about the title of our session. First, the idea of learning as becoming points to a philosophy of education and approach to pedagogy that views education as a process of continual unfolding that's ongoing, that's lifelong. So to think in terms of becoming invokes a line of thought that emphasizes potential, that rejects determinism, that expresses a flexible openness to the new. Second, the idea of learning to become gets at the capacity to imagine, to conceptualize for oneself a good and fulfilling life. So we're really talking about the capacity to aspire, to have a rich vision of the life one wants to lead, the world one wants to form, and to have the tools to realize that. Of course, in conditions of exclusion, displacement, violence, the future can appear more as a set of shrinking possibilities than a world of hope and promise. But part of addressing inequality in today's world is making sure that human aspiration is fairly distributed. And third, it's maybe in the simplest terms, but no means the easiest, it's literally the question, what do we want to become in terms of our societies, in terms of what it means to be human, in terms of living with nature, other species, a living planet. So framing learning as learning to become, I think is a fundamentally transformative agenda because it invites us to become something we have not yet become. So I'll close with that and pass back.
That's some cool ideas. Thank you, Noah, for sharing with us. And I think related to these ideas, I want to ask Elisabetta, what are the difficulties and challenges to bring innovations to the schools for the future? Because you work in the research department at Indere, and I want to know what are you trying to solve and propose about education innovation for the future?
Thank you, Guzman, and thanks to everybody for this occasion. I'm honored to be here. I think that what you have to remove firstly while innovating the model of schooling is the culture that still insists in school. That is a place where you go to learn something that is not connected with reality, because it's a word apart. It's there where you are being prepared to go in the word, but it's a word in a word. I mean, it's the place where you should uncover and discover your talents, your assets to be an active citizen and an active human being that can also find new solutions and alternatives to what is going on. So remove such a culture that is strictly connected with what Fernandez, you said at the beginning in your experience, which means assessment in scores, tests, what you have failed and what you have passed, without thinking that meaningful learning experiences is when you experience the knowledge. And you experience the knowledge in the word, within the word, not separating these two words. And through my network, which is now mainly of 1,000 175 schools in Italy, we are experimenting new tools that can help both students to be more conscious of what knowledge is for them, is something for being, for becoming, but also for being active and to decide who you want to be, and not to who you are in the society. And on the other hand, we help schools in thinking that they also have to learn to become in such an uncertain world, which is now even more uncertain because of the pandemic era and crisis. And that's the main challenge that we are facing, because it's like the statement that you have to unlearn what you have learned and relearn again, which is also a tagline together with learning to become, that has to remove concepts and habits that normally teachers use in their daily experience with the students. So those are my ideas, and I will leave the floor to the next panel, because I would like to share and dialogue about it.
Yeah, I think maybe in 5 or 7 minutes we can talk about it. I don't know, but I want to ask Diana, which is our last panelist, because we are talking about education and innovation, and I wanted to know if education and social innovation should be something that coexist together or need to be separate. It is essential to have social innovation and education in a same package, or we need to separate it?
Absolutely, they need to be in the same package. And to share why, if we go back to the origins of the current education system that we have, we know they were inextricably linked to fueling the growth of the Industrial Revolution, right? And we are in a very new moment now, and we need to raise our children, and we need an education system that is much different for the world that we are living in now, one of increasing complexity, one with increasingly rapid change. And Ashoka's answer to that is to ensure that we are all of us who are working with young people in the education system as parents, as mentors, as in and outside the education system, that we are building the capacity for young people to be change makers for the good of all. And we also are seeing this as another way to address inequalities, that young people of privilege who are in fancy schools and have access to extracurriculars that are developing the whole person, who are focused on becoming and building that skill sets, are change makers. And we now need to find very rapidly ways to get this insight and this change making ability, which we see in across the globe, capacity and skill sets and mindsets, not just reserved for the privileged, but for everyone. And I think back to one of my inspirations, who is Maria Montessori, and her proving the concept that young street kids had the capacity to learn and were as smart as everyone else. And more importantly, the insight that I can't believe we haven't figured out to bring into our education system, which is how she built agency into the learning environment. And this is key and critical to being a change maker. That openness, that ability to learn from anybody and anything, and to have this focus of openness, curiosity, discovery built into not just what we learn, but how we learn.
I like a lot your ideas, Diana. Thanks for share. Before continuing, I'll like chatting and ask some questions for us. I want to remember, audience, that you can share your ideas and questions to our panelists in the chat, and Luca can send to me. Well, I like all your ideas, and I want to start asking a main question about, and then we can chat in and share other questions. So we are talking about change education, but I want to know what are these changes that we need and where we need to do it. Because I think education is not just something that happens in the school, the families, the government, politics. There is a lot of things that needs to do with education. So I wanted to know what we need to do to change for the future. And for example, Elisabetta or Noah, if you want to start, or Diana. Then okay, Elisabetta, perfect. Or Mono.
Okay. There is one question that you have to keep in mind, and I learned it from Perkins at the Harvard University, when he posed this question, what's worth learning about, okay? And what's worth learning means that you do not have to give lots of information, lots of knowledge, big repository of knowledge that are not useful for students' lives, but you have to give them the chance to be critical and to see and experience the knowledge in life. And that was part of what I was saying before. But why did I go back to that? Because from my side, I see that a lot can be done inside the school, but with the participation of those who are the real actor of the schools. And these are all the teachers, the principals, the families, and also the, we call it third sector, which is association and ONG, all the people that are already engaged in the construction of the world that is outside, and they can help to have different curricula at school, okay, and redesign curricula for being meaningful and for letting you be what you want to be in the real world, okay? So the participation is not that you open the school once in a while and you dialogue with those people. Participation is a process that you have to build, opening your school every day to what is going on and dialoguing with the others, thinking that they can give you ideas. They are part of the solution of this big changement that we have to produce together. We have to react to together. So what I see in school is in Italian school, the average Italian school, but also abroad, because I'm part also of a board of directors of the European Ministry of Education, is that the dialogue with the family appears when you have to speak about what was failed, what didn't go well in the process of learning, and it was mainly the process of teaching. The students was not reacting as we were expecting. And instead, now there is a new policy among our schools where they are trying to do a participating process to the development of school, which is very hard because principals have no longer to deal only with the question of how to open the school, what kind of scores are be given, and what kind of classes they have to construct. They have to think as it is a new ecosystem, the school, that is continuously speaking and learning from the other ecosystems around. So it's an interdependencies of systems that now have to go beyond the borders they have constructed around them.
Yeah, I think part of that ecosystem are organizations like Unesco and governments and some other elements. So I wanted to know your opinion, Noah, about all this.
I think
continue, sir.
Elisabetta's bringing up a really important point, and Deanna's comments hinted at it too, which is that what's worth learning about, what we learn, how we learn, are really fundamentally tied to how we set up learning, how we set up education in our societies. And I mean, I think to me, it's very clear that if we're going to thrive in this complex, increasingly precarious, fragile world, there's three things we need to think about. One is our relationships with each other as human beings. The second is our relationships with the planet, the natural world. And the third is our relationships with technology, with machines, AI, biotech, the tremendous transformations of which we are a part. And I think this really requires us to think in terms of what it means to be human, right? So I would suggest that to turn these entangled relationships with each other, with the planet, with technology for the better, we really at this point need to focus on nurturing education and knowledge as a global commons, right? I think this is the best strategy we have for meaningful learning experiences, for setting up relevant skills. If we begin thinking more about education as one of the most important global commons, probably sitting alongside water, atmosphere, biodiversity in its importance, right? But a commons doesn't just exist on its own. It needs to be nurtured, right? And at times it needs to be protected. So we can say that knowledge and learning are some of humanity's greatest renewable resources, but we also know that they can be enclosed, right? That people can be excluded, that restrictions can be created. So I think the challenge becomes to recognize the diverse knowledge resources of humanity and focus these meaningful learning experiences on using and adding to that commons. So that has a lot of implications for how we set up schooling. I mean, basically, I would pin my response here on the argument that thriving in the coming century, so our collective capacity to thrive in the coming century, is going to come about if in education and in other areas, we really start to care for and enrich this global commons. So a full agreement with Deanna that social innovation is a part of this, and also just want to highlight Elisabetta's really fantastic point earlier about that this challenge requires learning and unlearning, right? We do need to change. There's got to be a fundamentally transformative agenda and ethos around all of this. If I could just give one example of how we might translate some of this into the organization of school and the organization of learning, I'd go back to the Delors report, the 1996 Unesco report, some of you know, where the suggestion was made there that it's a very useful suggestion that we think about education in terms of 4 pillars: learning to be, learning to do, learning to know, and learning to live together. Maybe learning to become becomes a 5th pillar. I don't know, but let's just take those 4 pillars right now. So in the late 90s, this idea of learning to be placed great emphasis on the development of one's personality, being able to act with autonomy, judgment, personal responsibility. I think where we are now, we need to take these pillars and think about them in relation to the commons, right? In relation to the common good. So I think from learning to be, we would pretty quickly move into learning to care, to really prioritize a relational way of being. And of course, there's a lot of feminist theory to draw on to help us there. If we apply a commons framing to learning to do, the emphasis would shift to learning to collectively mobilize. So not just doing individually, but doing together. I mean, that's the change making that Deanna was talking about. If we apply a commons framing to learning to know, that becomes learning to study, inquire, and co-construct together. I mean, we do need to think more about how education and learning are social processes. And then finally, you know, this notion of learning to live together. Together, of course, is a very robust and useful concept. But if we turn that into the challenge of learning to live in common, I think we really get some useful ideas. I mean, if there's one thing we want to pull from the COVID experience, is that it's the challenge of living on Earth in 2020 and beyond is not just peaceful coexistence, right? The challenge is to shape a healthy, sustainable way of co-living, right? To recognize our common humanity, our shared futures, and chart out a joint, fundamentally more shared experience. So I'll close with that.
Well, thanks, Noah. Thank you so much. I want to hear Diana about this topic, and also let me add another question, but I want to hear you. So, to all these changes, I wanted to know who needs to lead these changes, because I don't know who needs to do it, who needs to lead. Is UNESCO, is schools, is the countries together? But I also wanted to know about what do you think about Noah and Elisabetta speak about. Diana?
So at Ashoka, we believe in everyone a change maker. Everybody has a role to play here. And what roles each person plays comes from what their position, what their purview is. And that's why everyone makes it better, because nobody can see everything, right? I can offer concrete examples of what we're seeing. We talk about the changemaker mindset as having 4 components: empathy, teamwork, a new leadership that is not a top-down control leadership, but one that is based in sense making and sensing what others can contribute and bringing that out to the fore, and practicing change making. And I think of an elementary school teacher that I talked with and told the story that as she was reading in story time a book about shapes, there was a blue rectangle in the book, and one of the 5-year-old students saw that rectangle in the storybook was a recycling bin, a blue recycling bin in the shape of a rectangle. And that 5-year-old asked the teacher, why don't we have recycling bins in our classroom? And that teacher made in the next class, the classroom paint rectangle boxes blue and distribute them about the school. So every classroom had a blue rectangular recycling box. Imagine the moment of power that not only the student who had that idea, but the whole classroom experienced as a result of that. We need young people to to feel and own the power to remake the world for the better in the ways that they want. And for this to be part of the classroom, not just part of the classroom, but part of home life, part of, recreation and all the other aspects of the way young people grow up. And some of the ways that Ashoka has been working with partners to do this, include teacher trainings, schools and schools of ed, where we are partnering to support efforts, teachers unions, ministries of education in Brazil, in Japan, sharing some of these ideas, also with the International Baccalaureate Organization, which has made some changes to bring change making as part of the core curriculum for young people to graduate. Not additive, but built right in, not another thing on top of everything else that young people have, but using that as a basis around which curriculum is built. Again, so young people are using their agency in the education process so that, as Noah stated, it becomes part of a lifelong effort and exercise. It doesn't end with your school years.
I love it. Thanks, Diana, for sharing your ideas, and thanks for all of you to share your ideas. Before continuing chatting, because I like it a lot, what is going on, I want to repeat to the audience that you can share your questions to these panelists and they can answer them and speak about it. So I want to continue asking Diana about agency, because you before speak about agency, and I want you to know, to explain and why it's important to have it. And then I want to invite you to ask a question to the rest of the panelists. So let's speak a little bit about agency, and then you can share a question to Noah or Elisabetta.
Mm-hmm. So I think of change making like a muscle. And we have learned this from our Ashoka fellows around the globe when we started to ask, when did you get started? If I think of our fellows, our social entrepreneurs, they're the Olympians of change making, right? There are people who are building new policy, who are changing market dynamics for big, real systems change at a national and continental level. We ask them in our selection process how this journey, what their life path to get to the change idea we are talking to them about. And we find that most start when they're young, or they have a life-changing experience, but they start in their early teen years. And we hear stories of them starting because some adult ally helped them give themselves permission. To make a change. School, whether it's a teacher, a neighbor, a relative, if they aren't already making the change. And those changes come because they are practicing conscious empathy. It's not just a passive compassion, but they've noticed something in the world, in their neighborhood, in their school, in their religious community that isn't right, and they want to do something about it. That's the doing something about it is when they're connecting with their agency and their power. And I think we vastly underestimate young people's ability to see and do. And if we unleash that in the young years, that muscle grows over a lifetime, so that the next change is bigger and broader for the good of all.
And I invite you, Diana, to ask a question to Noah or Elisabetta if you have it.
I would ask Noah, where do you see where in the system are things most stuck, as a way to help us bring attention and creativity to where are the barriers to a new kind of becoming are? Is it mindsets? Is it how institutions are working or not working?
Thanks, Diana. I appreciate the question. I mean, I think it's easy to lose sight sometimes, you know, particularly when we're troubled by so many things that are not working right in our world. It's easy to lose sight of how much actually is working really well in education. And one of the reasons we lose sight of that is because we do freight education with a lot of hopes and desires, right? And I think part of the response is to be a bit realistic. Have a great day. A bit realistic about what we expect of schools and learning. So my first point would be probably to kind of commend the teachers. I mean, the people that, let's not forget that there are countless brilliant educators out there that are connecting with kids in exactly the way you just described, Diana. So, you know, I think it's a poor starting point if we begin society, yeah, some crises. Economies, yes, some crises. Schools, some problems for sure. But I think crisis is a poor starting point. I think though that one of the key points of leverage that we have is to think a little bit more carefully about how we resource learning and education in our societies. And I do mean financially resource on one level, but I also mean sort of spiritually support, morally support, ethically support, politically support, sort of other ways that we support through innovations, right? That we prioritize the resources, and I mean resources in a really broad sense, like the infrastructures that support learning and knowledge creation, right? That could be a library, right? I mean, that ranges, those infrastructures that support learning, you know, range from libraries to local village schools. They include online encyclopedias. They include the professional training of teachers. You mentioned that Diana. So I think thinking about how we resource education is maybe one of the key steps we can take to move through some of these log jams. You know, how we set up infrastructures of schools and also beyond schools to support learning. Elisabetta, I've been playing with your notion of unlearning, and it's something that I've heard people talking about lately. You know, we can sort of add these long lists of we need to learn to do this, we need to learn to do this, right? And we probably do, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff we need to unlearn. So you mentioned one thing, which is, you know, a certain kind of culture. Can you talk more about things that you think we need to unlearn?
It seems to be a new tagline, but is part of the way that children learn to become. And I try to explain. Through all their lives, starting from the beginning, when children learn not to use electricity or not to use a knife improperly, what they do at a cognitive structure, they give information of what to do and not to do. And so they learn and unlearn at the same moment, okay? But nowadays, it means mostly that unlearning is part of a process that gives you the chance to relearn from the experience that you do daily of what is changing. So it's much to do with not thinking with routine. Okay, so what we do is in an organization, as a school or as a product or organization in general, we introduce protocols, routines, so that you know what to do and how to react, because that's the solution. So it's really connected with what you were saying before about imagination, creativity, and lateral thinking, okay? So what you do in the unlearning phase is that maybe there could be another solution to such a problem. So it's like this crisis. Everybody is very concerned about data, numbers, analysis. We have discovered that networking among the world helps to recover from such a crisis, but still, at least in our nation, we still think that we have to go to school, we have to be in presence, that distance learning is just a solution for the emergency, but cannot be an opportunity of remodeling the system. So we are in the middle of unlearning, so that by we say arousing the experience, you can relearn and have a different solution. So if we have this statement of different phases, there is something that you should not unlearn anymore in your life. I mean, because it's part of you. But the ethical side that Diana was saying about mindset, relationships, this needs to be helped every day, and you can learn different ways of having relationship. I hope I answered to your question, but I have a question too. May I? And
Yes.
I mean, it's for Noah, but it's also for Diana. So please feel free to answer to it both. Noah was referring to something that now is more collective, something that has to be behaved in education, but also in other systems, thinking more to be done in group, because it gives values to the collective, to you and to the collective. But how in school you can preserve something that I think has to be preserved, the individual process. Because if you think that learning is only learning in group with the others, there might be the result that you do not balance the time for a single individual to be a part individually of the collectiveness. I hope it's an easy question. No, it's not, because
No.
I know we are still thinking how. And if I think at school now, is more for the individual, but not for the individual insight, for the individual thinking at his or her success, her position in the world, and not as part of a collectiveness.
Yeah. I mean, that's a key question, right? I mean, I think maybe it's, as you're suggesting, Elisabetta, it's a question of where you find balance, and perhaps we're slightly out of balance now. In suggesting, that we need to think about education as a global common good, we need to think about the commons. I wouldn't want to suggest at all that we move away from the really important notion of the individual. I think some of the ideas about, individual autonomy do us a disservice when they allow us to ignore the ways that we are dependent on connections with each other. I think in some other sessions at the summit, we hear people talking about living with the earth as opposed to on the earth, and I think that notion of relationality and connectivity is key to striking a better balance between the individual and the collective, and we can spin out educational implications. But over to you, Dana. It's addressed to both of us.
I think we have to do both simultaneously. And there are two frameworks at Ashoka that I go to here. One is that now and in the future, we're seeing a new kind of organizing, which requires a different kind of institution where we have teams of teams. And one of the pieces that I see connected to this is inclusivity. That, gone are the days where there's one leader that leads all the time and knows everything. We live in a world where no one can have all the data, which is why we need teams of teams that with a more inclusive view of the data from multiple perspectives, we're going to get a more complete view. And so having methodologies and a method of organizing where we have teams of teams where, in one team, you're a leader because you have an expertise, but it also demands that leadership now includes making sure that you're hearing from and have the ability to draw people out and understand those perspectives. It's a sense-making skill, right? More than a charging across the battlefield. How do we organize in a team of teams way where everybody's skills and abilities get to shine, so everyone gets to be a leader? And this, dare I go back to agency, but if we are organizing and a classroom teacher sees what's special about each child and finds a way to position that to contribute to the collective, I mean, it's a radically different kind of perhaps teacher training. I mean, you tell me, Elizabeth, the best teachers I've had it, but not all of our teachers, not all the teachers I have had. And how do we increase that ability in teachers, not only in terms of their developing their skills, but in what we're asking of teachers. Perhaps less test scores and more life skills. I don't know. But what do we also need to change in terms of policy to enable the blue cardboard painting boxes exercise, right?
Let me, sorry, Diana, interrupt you, because we have a lot of questions of the audience, and we have not more minutes. So I have 3 questions, one for each of you, and you need to answer them like in 1 or 2 minutes. It's a complex question, but we want you to know. So I'm gonna start with Noah. Noah, so someone of the audience asked us, how does care translate in the educational day-to-day reality? Fast.
Yeah, how does caring translate into day-to-day educational reality? I mean, I think it requires us to put the human relationships in learning settings in the foreground. Deanna gave us a great example of the empathy of a teacher that allowed for the connection with a child's thinking and the propulsion of that forward, and what sounded like a great, really powerful lesson. So I think part of caring is remembering that human flourishing, human relationships are at the core of educational processes. We can lose sight of that sometimes in our heavily assessment-driven world. Where we talk about needing to cover content and prove knowledge. We do need to do that, but not at the expense of other things. So I think caring maybe comes into the curriculum as a key starting point, a key reference point that we come back to.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So I'm gonna jump to another question to Elisabetta. So someone from the audience asked us, what is the future role of teachers in a changed education system? It's hard, just 1 or 2 minutes, remember.
It's to be resources for learning with their students. So they have to think no more about being someone who only teach, okay, but someone who learn together with their students, and they can do easily if they approach to new methodologies that we call innovative methodologies, where you can find both dimensions to take care of the single pupil and to promote group learning, which is mainly based on collaborative learning, team working, open work. But this means that they have to think themselves as mentoring, coacher, people that are there ready to have new solution every day, because they look at what is going on and they have also tools to measure if the learning has occurred, which is not testing people if they have notion, which is something completely different.
Oh, okay, thanks for saying, Elisabetta.
It was not easy.
Yeah, I know. I know. And in this round of like fast question, there is a last question about what we have speak about, Diana, about change making, social innovation, and education. And there is someone who asked, how can we leverage it to the level of systemic change? Sorry.
I would even push it beyond systemic change, because I think if we change the mindset, it unleashes a whole set of possibilities that we can't imagine now without this. If we change mindsets, we're going to get to systems change much more quickly, because mindset is a barrier to imagining the next system that will work. And I think one mindset question is if we could think of education not as preparing young people for jobs, as job seekers, but instead to have education be about creating job creators.
Okay. So thank you so much for answering this question from the audience. So before we end, I want you to, I have a question to ask to you. So we need to answer also fast. So imagine we are in 2013 and you have a nephew, or maybe more 2015, and you have a nephew. So how do you think the education should be? What is, well, your nephew goes to the school or goes to where the education is, how it's look? So maybe Elisabetta, if you want to start answer this question. It's a difficult question, I know.
There are 7 visions on the UNESCO report about the future of education, but I think that it still has to be in a place. Okay, so education has to be in a place where there is it's a formal place where there is enough space to move so that I can follow different things at the same moment. I can have different relations with different students, but it has to be taken in a place that is visible, that is devoted to education. Of course, I also think that this place has to be open and much more distributed in the bigger area that are around. And this means not only library, but also factories, also other actors that influence education and that create education and knowledge. So that's the main challenge, to decide that there is a place, but this place is connected with other places.
Yeah, thanks, Elisabetta. So I wanted to know, I wanted to know what do you think, Noah? What is your vision?
So I would have also started with the place, but let me just say, I see in this place the continuing use of texts and written objects. I think texts really, and the way we work with texts highlight a key part of education, which is its intergenerational nature, right? I mean, education is not simply about passing values from one generation to the next, although it does have that aspect of creating continuity, of bringing cultural learning. What happens in schools, what happens in any learning, doesn't begin from nothing. It begins from the kind of collective cultural resources of humanity. And so I think my nephew in 2030 would be in a learning place where intergenerational connections were emphasized, where texts were used. Pass over to Diana, I think is the plan.
Yeah, Diana. Yeah, thanks, Noah.
And my nephew would be going to a school where success is measured by the number of graduates that are change makers.
I love it. So I think all of us, the audience, and four of us, we want to stay more, but we need to end. So first of all, I want to thank you, the audience, to be with us for chatting and share their ideas and the questions, and also thank Noah, Elisabetta, and Diana to be with us. This, I think, is a wonderful experience, a wonderful chat, and so we need to chat more and create these platforms. So thanks all of us. See you soon in the summit. Thanks. Bye.